Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here. I appreciate you guys coming out to learn about splitting equity. So I'm going to share my screen. So you should see a picture of a finger pointing at you, the good finger.
We can see it.
Good. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate being. I'm sorry I can't be there in person because it's cold here in Chicago right now, but I appreciate being part of this. I was sent here by the Farley Center of Entrepreneurship, which is where I teach a couple of classes, including principles of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial sales and marketing. And in all my classes, I always make sure I touch on equity splits because I find that students struggle a lot with equity splits in early stage companies. So this presentation is perfect equity splits for early stage bootstrap startups. In my experience, there's very few student startups that are well funded out of the gates. They always are starting with nothing, which is fine, but they got to have an equity split deal in place. It's usually the first deal people do with their companies. The first thing they do is they sit down after they come up with their ideas. They say the first agreement we're going to make is going to be our equity split. And ideally, their equity split would be equal to an individual's contribution over the total value of the firm. So your share would equal your value of your contribution over the total value of the firm. The problem is we can't know these things. We don't know what your contribution is going to be. We don't know how long it's going to take to produce the results we want to produce. We don't know how much the company's worth. In the beginning, it's worth 0. So you can't calculate that number with any accuracy. So what happens is we wind up doing this. The employee's promises divided by the founder's dreams. So the employee says, I'm going to go do all kinds of awesome work for you, and I'm going to get new customers and make new products and do fantastic things. It's going to be worth millions of dollars. And the founder says, we're going to be worth billions of dollars and have a huge IPO. So if I give you 1% of my company, it's going to be worth millions of dollars and you're going to be super happy. And it's a ridiculous conversation. And unfortunately, because it's such a ridiculous conversation, we seek out advice from good people like lawyers and advisors, and of course, professors. We look to, and our rich uncles and our successful people we know in our lives and our advisors. And the advice always comes down in a similar format. Estimate your financial projections. You know, what's the rule of thumb for a CTO in San Diego, or what's an industry standard for XYZ? There's no concrete answer to this question. We're basically just trying to foresee future events. And what the result usually is what's called a fixed equity split. Most companies do fixed equity splits. Most of them at the outset of the venture, the first deal they do is a fixed equity split, which means chunks of equity are doled out in fixed amounts, like 60-40. So maybe it was your idea and you're smarter than I am, so you get 60% and I get 40%. Or maybe we're peers, but you want to keep control, so you get 51% so you can maintain control. Or some other variation of that if there's 3 partners. Usually we just say, screw it, let's keep it simple, we'll go 50-50. When I look at startup teams for students, I often see equal splits. There's 4 people in the team, these get 25%. It's extremely common to do equal splits. And again, equity is doled out in advance of any work actually happening. But what if something changes? What if you do all the work? So we're 50-50 partners, and I do all the work, or you do all the work, I own half your company. Or what if I'm a marketing person and you're an IT person and we bring in a marketing person to help us? Does it come out of my share or your share? It doesn't help you, it helps me. Or what if I want to quit? Do I get to keep my half of the company, or you get to keep your half of the company if you quit? So there's millions of things that are going to change from the beginning of our company to when we actually produce some value. I was with a startup runs in graduate school, and the CTO of the company got hit by a bus and subsequently died of his injuries. And the surviving president of the company asked me, does this mean I have to give his wife half our profits forever? And indeed it does, because she now owned half the company and she had no CTO skills whatsoever. So she didn't want to give it up, and I don't blame her, but there was a fight that ensued and that company ultimately went out of business. So the struggle with equity splits is an extremely, extremely, extremely common problem. It's one that I've committed a great deal of my life to solving. Because what happens is, when you do a fixed split, one of 2 things will be true. The first thing that will be true is some people will have more than their fair share. So you've got the greater than gator here, alligator here. There'll be more than their fair share. And some people are okay having more than their fair share, but nobody wants less than their fair share. So it's the less than symbol here. I call these alligator pit negotiations. If you know that you're either going to come out with more than your fair share or less than your fair share, you approach it like an alligator pit. Your instinct is self-preservation. You want to get as much for yourself and get out of there as fast as you can. These are not the kind of emotions and that you want to bring to a negotiating table with your partners. I call this the fix and fight method. You fix the split in time, you do a fixed split in chunks of equity, and you fight about it later when things change. And then when you're done fighting, you get yet another fixed split, you fight about it again. I've talked to lots of lawyers all over the world, and on average, they say that 60 to 80% of the deals they do wind up in dispute that requires legal intervention. And indeed, I see lots of student startups fall apart because of this very problem. Because if it's not fair, it's not fun. And I myself have experienced this problem. And I set out a few years ago to create a model that was perfectly fair. I wanted to reward the actual contributions people make, not what we say we're going to do, what we actually do. I want to provide ongoing motivation so you continue to be motivated to work. I want to accommodate team changes, people come and go all the time. I want to be flexible in the face of rapid change because companies move quickly. And I want to get rid of the gators. I don't want anyone to think that I'm taking advantage of them or they're taking advantage of me, because as long as it's fair, it'll be fun. So the best way to understand how this model works is a game of blackjack. Let's pretend that you and I are going to go play blackjack together as a team, not as opponents, but as a team. So we're working together on this. You put your chip down, or I put my chip down, and you put your chip down. The dealer deals an ace, which is good, and another ace. We agree to split the winnings we agree to split the winnings 50-50 because we're friends. So we go to the table, we put our money down the table, and we've got two aces. This is a good thing. In blackjack, you split the aces and double down. So we split them, but I'm out of cash and you're not. So you put two more chips down. So now you've bet 3 chips, and I've only bet 1 chip. We still don't know if we're going to win, or how much we're going to win, or how long it's going to take to win. You can't predict the future events. What we know for sure is that you bet 3 chips and I bet 1 chip. If we win, a 50-50 split isn't fair. It should be 75-25. Your share of the winnings should be based on your share of the bets, which is a logical, obvious, unambiguous conclusion that your share of the winnings should be based on your share of the bets, regardless of our prior deal. We agreed to 50-50, and I could sue and probably win, but that doesn't make it fair. What's fair is that your share of the winnings should be based on your share of the bets. And startups are exactly the same thing, except we're betting on ideas instead of on cards. And we bet time and money and relationships and supplies and equipment. Every time we contribute to a startup and we're not paid, we're placing a bet on that startup. And the value of our bet is equal to the fair market value of our contribution. So if I'm worth $100,000 a year and I work for you for a year and don't get paid, I am betting $100,000. I'm not betting more than that because I'm not magically worth more just because I'm working for a startup. I'm not worth less than that because I'm still worth what I'm worth. I'm worth the fair market value of my contribution. So in slicing pie, a person's share of the equity should be based on that person's share of the bets. So you think about the blackjack table with all these chips on the table, we simply keep track of who bet what and split up equity based on that. That's the basic premise. And there's 2 parts to the model. There's an allocation framework, which determines how much each person gets, and a recovery framework, which describes how we get equity back from someone when they leave the company. Especially in student startup companies, the people are coming and going all the time. There's usually 1 or 2 people that are kind of the core members of the team, and then the students join the team through class or wherever else, and people are coming and going. So we have to have a way of recovering equity when someone leaves. This animal is called a grunt, so you may hear it referred to as a grunt fund sometimes. But it is a one-size-fits-all solution to the allocation, recovery, and equity in an early stage of bootstrapped company, which means no matter where you are or what kind of company it is or who's involved, no matter what, this always works exactly as I describe. So it doesn't need to be tweaked or changed or modified. It always works exactly the same way. So here's the allocation framework. In the slicing pie model, we use a fictional unit of at-risk contribution called a slice. A slice is like a poker chip. It's a fictional unit of risk. It doesn't have any value. It's not a share of equity. It doesn't have any, you can't sell it or buy it. It's just a representation of risk being made, putting things put at risk. So you convert your contributions to slices, and at any given time, your share is equal to your slices divided by all the slices. Just like in blackjack, your share of the winnings at that point in time would be, if you win, your chips divided by all the chips. And it self-adjusts over time as things change. So every quarter, every semester, people contribute more, people join the team. As bets are placed, the equity split, underlying equity split will ultimately change. But as you'll see, we don't actually freeze it until later. Yes?
Mike, a quick question, and this is coming from me. Those slices that you talk about, could those be milestones in the business? Could it be relationships that they're bringing in? Could it be somebody, if somebody brings in the first $1 million worth of capital into the business and they're solely responsible for doing that through their contacts? Is that a slice? Sort
of. Now, I'm glad you asked that. Thanks for asking. You always want to run your business as if you were funded. You want to make decisions and acquire things as if you were paying cash. So you could do a milestone-based compensation, but most companies don't do milestone compensation. If you work for a regular company, they don't say, we're not going to pay you anything until you produce. You usually get paid a salary. Sometimes if you raise money, there's a finder's fee. If you secure a sale, there's a commission on a sale. We'll talk about this in a minute. But you always think, if I was going to pay for this contribution, how much would I pay for it and how would I pay? That's the fair market value. So when you bring somebody in to hire them just to raise money for you, you would think about, if this person was actually raising funds for us and I was just going to pay them cash, how would I pay them cash? You might give a 5% finder's fee on $1 million, which would be $50,000 payment, which you can pay in cash or you can use slices instead.
Thank you.
Good. There's two kinds of contributions. There's a non-cash contribution, which is things like time and relationships and ideas and certain facilities, things that don't require you to take cash out of your pocket in order to contribute them. If I give you my time, I'm not spending cash. And there are cash contributions, which I do have to take cash out of my pocket. So things like unreimbursed travel expenses or expenses I incur on behalf of the company, small investments, and some things fall in the middle. So for instance, if I buy a truck for the company, that's cash out of my pocket, so it's considered a cash contribution. If I own the truck and it's in my backyard, it's a non-cash contribution. So you always want to think about, if it requires cash out of pocket, it's a cash contribution. If it does not, it's a non-cash contribution. And the reason that's important is because I can take the fair market value of those things. I can determine the fair market value, but I want to accommodate the fact that it's put at risk. So in slicing pie, you get 2 slices for every dollar in non-cash contribution you add, and you get 4 slices for every dollar in cash. And the reason that is because if I paid you $100 an hour to work for me, and you wanted to buy something that cost $100, you would have to work more than an hour to earn enough money. Because when I paid you, I'd pay employment taxes and Social Security taxes, and when you receive the money, you'd pay income taxes, and when you bought the stuff, you'd pay sales taxes. So taxes are a big burden. Plus, I want you to think twice before spending my money. So I got to put a higher weight on the cash in order to align incentives properly. So for every dollar in non-cash, you get 2 slices. For every dollar in cash, you get 4 slices. So for instance, take your fair market salary, you subtract cash compensation, because if I'm paying you, it's not a bet. So if you're worth $100,000 a year and I paid you $100,000 a year, you're not placing any bets. So I subtract your cash compensation and I multiply by 2 to get your grunt hourly resource rate, or GRR, which is the sound you make when you're hard at work in your company, figuring 2,000 hours in a year. So if you're worth $50 an hour, which is $100,000 a year, and I don't pay you anything, then you're betting 100 slices per hour. If I pay you $10 an hour, you're only betting $40 an hour, so your rate drops to 80 slices per hour. If you're betting cash, you put cash contributions in the bank. When you consume the cash, when it's spent on expenses and things like that, it converts to 4 slices per dollar. Equipment. If it's a new piece of equipment that I owned, that I bought for the company, it's treated as a cash contribution. If I owned it, you treat it as the resale value or the purchase price, depending on how long you've owned it. Everything has a fair market compensation value. So commissions on sales, we talked about a second ago. If I bring in a sale, I'm entitled to a commission. You can pay my commission in cash if you have cash, or if you don't, you use slices instead. My ideas are always really, people are always excited about their ideas. Ideas are really important if they can produce results. So an idea that generates income can get a royalty on revenues, or it can be part of the job. Yep.
Mike, with about 34 minutes left, we have a question coming in, and I think it's relevant to answer now. And the question is, how do you ensure that the slices are appropriately sized or are all equal?
Every slice is a marker for a bet that's been placed. So a dollar in non-cash is worth two slices, and a dollar in cash is worth 4 slices, no matter when it comes in or where it comes in from. So they always represent the same thing. So I'll show you how it works in action.
Okay, great.
So here's a group of students looking to start a company. This person has an idea. So they get a team together. The founder puts in time and equipment and ideas. The junior developer puts in some time to build the website and the app. And the rich uncle bankrolls the thing. You simply convert to slices, add them together, and divide each person's share up. And the share looks like this. So at this point in time, the split is exactly fair based on the relative value of each person's contributions. Now we're going to add another guy. This is Barry. He's a sales guy. He can make some rain. Put some time in and some relationships. Simply convert his stuff to slices the same way you did everybody else's stuff. Add it to the total and divide each person's share again. And now the pie is adjusted. So based on the new contributions, the pie automatically adjusts to accommodate that new person. So no matter what happens or what changes, it always accommodates. And one of the things that often happens is people quit the company. When people quit, you want to get equity back from them. So there's 4 reasons why somebody can quit a company. They can be fired for good reason, meaning they show up with a gun to work, or they embezzle money, for instance. That's obviously you fire someone for good reason. Or they weren't performing, which means warning, warning, fired. So 2 warnings, then fired is fired for cause. They can also be fired for no good reason. You can just fire someone for whatever reason you want. They can resign for good reason, which implies that the company made promises it couldn't keep. So it might have said, we're going to raise money in 6 months and pay you full salary. 6 months comes around, no money materializes. That's good reason to resign. And the last reason is you can resign for no good reason, meaning you just up and quit for the hell of it. So in reasons A and D, the employee is causing that separation by their behaviors. So they would lose their slices for non-cash contributions, and their cash contributions would turn into a loan. So when you walk away from the deal, you're walking away from your bet. On the flip side, if you resign for good reason or you're fired for no good reason, your bet stays on the table, and you continue and it will convert to equity along with everybody else. So here's an example of how that works. Here's our team. The junior developer isn't doing her job. She gets 1 warning. A week goes by, she's still not doing her job. 2 warnings, and then she's fired. She had non-cash contributions on the table, so she's walking away from her bet. If she wants to keep her bet, she shouldn't get fired. She should stay with the company, but she's walking away. So we simply take her stuff out of her slices out and redivide each person's share. So now the split looks like this. So again, it self-adjusts to accommodate the fact that something changed. Things are always changing. Every day things are changing. The model automatically adjusts to accommodate the change. Now eventually that'll stop happening. It's called baking the pie. It turns a crisp golden brown. That happens at break even or Series A. When you start generating revenues, you can use that money to pay people for their time and contributions. So if you're worth 50 bucks an hour and I pay you nothing, you're betting 100 slices. As cash comes in, I can afford to pay you more, and you're betting fewer slices. As more cash comes in and more cash comes in, I continue to pay your hourly rate down as I can. Eventually I can pay you your full hourly rate or your full salary, and the pie naturally stops accumulating slices. At that point, the pie bakes. Once my expenses are all met, I get profits, and the profits are distributed based on the slices in the pie. The equity solidifies at that point, and the equity is divided up. The other thing that could happen is you could raise money. For instance, you could negotiate a pre-money valuation for your company and raise some money, in which case you are selling a piece of your company. You use that money to pay salaries and pay for expenses, and the pie bakes and the money is split up with the investor. So you get a perfectly fair split and always self-adjust to stay fair. You're rewarding the actual contributions people make. People remain motivated to participate and keep going. We've accommodated team changes. It works in the face of rapid change, and there's no way someone can take advantage of each other. Now, in my experience, there are 3 reasons why you would not use this. The first reason is they don't get it. Someone doesn't understand it. And this kind of seminar and this kind of experience is what I'm trying to teach the world how this works. Once you get it, it makes a lot of sense. But there are plenty of resources to learn it. There's several books I've written on the topic. There's a new one coming out soon. The book's been translated into about a dozen different languages all over the world. There's optional software, there's games, there's all kinds of resources. So my job is to teach people how to do it. The second reason is they're not willing to learn it. People have been doing it their way for so long, the old school way, just give me my X% and I'll be happy. I always advise people walk away from these types of people. If you're not willing to learn something new, it's a struggle. And the third reason is someone does get it, but they're willing to take advantage of you. And this could easily happen with a large investor. They understand what the model is, but they want to have an impressive, stack the cards in their favor. In this case, you have to tread carefully.
Mike,
So
we have a question coming in.
Sure.
We have a question coming in on Zoom meeting, and the question is, how often do you reallocate the slices? Do you reallocate them monthly, quarterly, annually?
That's a good question. So it can take a number of different forms. It depends on if you have an LLC or C Corp. In LLC, there's a periodic readjustment of the membership shares according to how different people do it. In a C Corp, it can actually replace a time-based vesting schedule. So you'd issue restricted shares to individuals and then use Slicing Pie as the vesting schedule. So if Slicing Pie tells us it's a 2/3, 1/3 split, and we each have 10,000 restricted shares, you would get 10,000 vested, now I get 5,000 vested and wind up with 2/3, 1/3. So it actually replaces a vesting schedule. So they can take it under different forms depending where you are, what country, and what kind of entity you use.
We have a couple other comments here. I'll just read them off. This sounds great and equitable conceptually. Can you provide some examples of companies who have actually applied these techniques? And I think another nice question that kind of couples to that is, well, what a great idea, but is it too cumbersome in reality to employ these techniques? And what happens after the pie is baked? Is it fixed at that point?
Yes, those are some good questions. So the first answer is, there's lots of companies that use this. I have some case studies on my website. It's been used by, I've had 20,000 people sign up for my software over the past 4, 5, 6 years that have set up accounts at one time. I've sold hundreds of thousands of copies of the book all over the world. I've never once heard a single company come back and say it didn't work, as long as they followed the model. As far as being cumbersome, there's an impression that it's cumbersome, but the things that you track in Slicey Pie are the things that most companies track anyway. Most companies keep track of their payroll. They keep track of they file expense reports. There's nothing new to track here. The only difference is instead of tracking money that you're spending, you're tracking money that you're not spending. So there is a concern that this might be burdensome, but in practice, it's pretty easy to keep track of. I know that I worked for 2 weeks. My salary is $5,000. I didn't get paid this month, so it slices. Or I know that I bought a plane ticket. It's not confusing that I bought a plane ticket. I just submit my expense report. Or I know I received an invoice from a vendor that I didn't pay. That vendor received slices. So it's basic accounting. There's nothing new. What was the third question?
What happens after the pie is baked? Is everything fixed at that point?
Right. When the pie bakes, the split becomes fixed, and everyone's getting paid their salaries. So on a go-forward basis, if you brought in an investor after the pie was baked, every single shareholder would be subject to the same terms. You issue basically common shares. So if the investor wanted to get preferential treatment or do reverse vesting or whatever, everyone would be subject to the same deal. But the pie just becomes equity, and you own your equity in your company.
Okay, and we've got another good question coming in here, and the question is, how do you convert ideas to slices? And I think what that means is, what value do you put on either the idea of the business or an idea that moves the business forward while you're still converting slices?
So that's a good question, and it's a common question. So there's two answers to that. If your idea existed before the business started and it's fixed in space somehow, like you have a trademark or a patent or a copyright or some kind of trade secret or some kind of prototype or working model, there's something that is licensable, then you could put it into your startup as a license. So I used to work for a company called Plano, and we made fishing tackle boxes. If you had a fishing tackle box idea, you brought it to me. I was the head of marketing, and I would look at your idea. If I liked it, I would give you a royalty on that on the revenues, 2%. So the fair market value of a fishing tackle box idea in the United States is worth 2% on royalties on revenues. So if I don't pay you the royalty, it converts to slices. So the first way is to license your intellectual property to the startup to work on. The second way to do it is to just know that getting good ideas is your job. So if I have good ideas in the job, that's my job. So if I'm the VP of marketing, it's my job to have good ideas. So it would be my time that I put into the idea and expenses I incurred in my job, and it would just be part of it. So when I was working at the fishing tackle box, I had fishing tackle box ideas. I didn't get paid extra for them because it was my idea, my job to have good ideas. Now I might get a bonus or a pat on the back, but it's really my job. So ideas are compensated either through a royalty or just part of being a good employee.
That makes a lot of sense. We have a couple more questions and about 24 minutes left in this session. The first one is, you assume that most companies have tracking systems in place. However, in the very early stages, these tracking systems may not be in place. How does this work in an early stage, mechanically? How do you keep track of all this?
Got it. Sure. So you can download a free spreadsheet on my website that'll track it. I offer software as a service where everyone can log in, can get on board and log their contributions and see the pie build in real time. So the software you can use it, which is optional. And what's more common is they didn't track from the beginning. They did a fixed split in the beginning and they didn't do any tracking. So there's a tool called the retrofit, where you actually it helps you recreate the past and what happened to the best of each person's ability. And it'll tell you where your pie is at any given moment. And then you can move forward using slicing pie. So it's true that most startups don't track. One of the most common, people often get to me when they realize they've hit a wall with their split and they're in a dispute, and slicing pie helps them unwind their dispute pretty quickly and pretty easily.
Okay, and we have another question coming in, and I'll try to paraphrase this because the question reads: shouldn't you want to be able to adjust shares after Series A as well? What about the initial idea that constitute the basis of the business model, and how much weight do you put in that for slices? And I think you've kind of answered the second one, but the first one, I think what that's referring to is, let's say that a business is capitalized with 10 million shares as it goes through Series A, kind of bake the pie as you've described. But then what happens if you issue another 10 million shares, or if you issue another X amount of shares for Series B? What happens then?
Well, think about the pie as the first round of equity, and just the common shares of the company. So you and I are partners, and we work together hand in hand, and we each earn half the shares, and then we bring in another person that starts earning shares, and by the time we're done with it, I own 10%, you own 20%, someone else owns 30%. So there's a breakdown of that original common shares. Let's say it's 1,000 shares we issue for that. At Series A, we issue another 1,000 shares. So we're all diluted the same way. At the next series, so our dilution's all the same because we're all in the same boat. Now, it doesn't preclude them from issuing stock options to us or additional shares to key managers in subsequent rounds. But our initial going into the round, we all have our share percentage based on the slicing pie. That make sense?
It does. Okay, we have about 21 minutes left. Mike, please continue.
Well, that was the main part of the presentation. I went a little fast because you're giving me the timestamps. I'm happy to answer more questions.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about again, and I think you might have gone a little quickly through this. Maybe you could talk again about the ABCD and what happens when employees stick around or leave, and go into some more detail on when that happens. Because for me, as an entrepreneur and having started many businesses at this point in my life, I've always put traditional things in place like forward vesting or reverse vesting, and I always have a lot of entrepreneurs and co-founders with me, some who I don't know, who ask questions like, well, if we're doing a future equity split, which is kind of like this, where's my voting stock? How do we vote on things today? And so I've always had to put those structures in place in case somebody left, whether they were fired or they left on their own accord. I really like what you've done here with this. Maybe you can just dive a little bit deeper into that, and maybe maybe relate it to how things work today with vesting and reverse vesting and things
Sure.
like that? Because I think there's some connection there that we can make.
So if you start a company today, David, and you work for a year and then you stop working on it, what happens?
Well, you walk away with your, well, if I start a company today and nobody else is involved and I stop working on it, the company goes under.
You just lose it. You walk away. You're basically walking away from your bet.
Yep.
If you continue working on it, but you do a terrible job, what happens to it?
Same thing.
Same thing. So the consequence for walking away from your business or not performing on your business is that it goes away and you lose your bet. So in slicing pie, even if you're a partner, if you walk away from your business because you get fired for cause, you're walking away from your bet. So firing for cause implies that I didn't do my job and I get warning, fired. A lot of founders agreements don't include this designation between someone who's getting fired for cause or not cause. So I got to say it's warning, fired. If I don't give you a warning, it's considered firing for no good reason. And I can do that. I can just say, I don't want to work with you anymore. You're too expensive. Or I found somebody I like better. Or there's no reason I can't do that, but I can't force you to walk away from your bet. I got to leave your bet on the table. Mm-hmm. If you resign for good reason, if I told you you're my vice president of marketing and now you're going to be my clean toilets for me, that's not what you wanted to do. That's not what you signed up for. So now you have good reason to leave the company. I've given you good reason. Or you can just up and quit on me one day and walk away and leave me in the lurch. So in those scenarios, your equities are either vulnerable or they're protected. In a time-based vesting schedule, which is extremely common, the 4-year cliff, all that kind of stuff.
I've used it many times.
Many times. The problem with that is, first of all, it implies that the passage of time is the only thing that matters. So my incentive as an employee is just to keep my job long enough to vest. And my incentive as an employer is to fire someone before they vest. Now, in the spirit of things, that's not what we want to do, of course, but the contract is written with those incentives provided. So if those incentives aren't important, why write a contract that provides incentives to do those things? So the slicing pie contract takes into account the nature of your separation and what happens to it when you walk away. The only thing that's protected if you're fired for cause or resign for no good reason is your cash gets paid back eventually. We had to remove the incentive to steal someone's money. I can't hire you and then fire you for no reason to keep your cash.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So in my experience, I've always done the 4-year vesting or the 4-year reverse vesting for co-founders, and just because that's common and that's what I was familiar with. But how does this apply if the pie gets baked within the first year?
So the pie wouldn't get baked unless there's cash available to pay everybody.
I see.
So an analogy that works is, let's say that you and I are brothers, mm-hmm. and our dad dies and gives us his company. You want to work for the company and I don't, but we each have half the shares. You would get paid your salary in addition to owning your shares. So your salary would be paid first in full at your fair market rate, and then what's left over after everyone's salary, it would be dividends. We each get paid half the dividends. If you decided that you didn't want to work there anymore, you could quit and your salary would go to somebody else to do your same job. Because you're getting paid a fair market rate, we hire someone to do your job and we still own our shares. We each get half the dividends even though they're not working for the company. Mm-hmm. That makes sense? So the idea is that we're not continuing to work for equity. We're working for our salary after the pie is baked. And there's so everyone's getting paid in full. If you're getting paid in full, you should be happy with the job. Most people work without getting paid any equity or any equity, they just get a salary. Mm-hmm. So we got to work the company up to the point where the salaries can be paid. If the salary is too low and we can't find anybody, then we're overstating our profits because we're not paying full market rates. If the salary is too high, then we're understating our profits. So we got to make sure we do a good job paying people.
I see. So with 15 minutes left, another quick question coming from me as we engage in this conversation, which I think is great, Mike. So how is this different if you have two people? So there's different structures whenever you start a business, right? You can have two co-founders who each put in $50,000 of friends and family, and they go out and hire six or seven people to hold different roles. sometimes it's 5 co-founders, and they're all working for equity for the first 6 months before they raise Series A or raise seed or whatever it is. There's different structures. Can you talk about how this changes from one structure to another, or is it just pretty consistent across the board?
What do you mean? What do you mean by different structures?
So let's say that you and I go and start a business. It's just you and I, and we each put in $50,000. So there's something for that. Chips coming in, we start hiring employees, and we have the employees. Maybe the employees they're getting slices, but we are as well. How does it work if there's a different type of business where you have maybe 5 or 6 co-founders together?
So,
or is it different if there's just one co-founder? Like, does it shift, or is it the same concept, regardless of the configuration?
it's universal. It always works. The only thing that has to happen is someone's got to be taking personal risk in order for it to be useful. So if I'm not getting paid, or if I'm not getting reimbursed for my expenses, then I'm betting on the table. So in the first scenario, we each put in $50,000. When I put money into a company in cash, it's not at risk because I can just ask for it back. If it's consumed and spent, it becomes at risk. At that point, it converts to slices. So my money sits in the bank, and when it's consumed, because it's a 4x multiplier, I think twice before I spend your money, which is what you want me to do anyway. So if I use that money to pay employees, then they're getting paid in full and they don't get slices. If I don't pay employees, then they get 2x slices. So it's always the same thing. If I'm going to pay for this, how do I pay for it? And then I just pay it, and I keep my equity. If I don't, I use slices. If you pay for everything, you get all the equity. And lots of companies start, and my company, I pay for everything, and I don't share my equity because I don't want to, because I pay for things. My employees get paid, and it's just easier for me. Now, and there was a time where I couldn't afford to do that, so I had to share equity this way. The other question you asked was voting rights.
Yes.
And a lot of times there's sort of what I call the illusion of control. If your decisions are so unpopular, you got to exercise a 51% voting right to get them through. You may not have much of teamwork anyway. But slicing pie technically puts the people in control who should have control. So if you have the most risk on the table, you should have a pretty big influence on what happens to the company. Now, that being said, there's ways of securing controlling interests through non-voting shares, or manager-managed LLCs. There's a number of ways to consolidate control. But slicing pie does give theoretical control to people who should have control.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, and you mentioned baking the pie at Series A. I've been in situations before where we've taken a little bit of seed money and then we go out and get a bridge loan. And sometimes a bridge loan is, a couple $1 million, $1 million, a couple $1 million to get you through the next 6 months to a year. And oftentimes people have to personally guarantee that.
Yep.
So with a personal guarantee, would that be 2 slices, 4 slices? I mean, in some ways it's real money, in other ways it's not.
That's a good question. So there's a couple things I tell people to keep in mind. Slicing pie is a financing tool for when financing isn't available. So there's other forms of financing, and that's a good thing to go after. I always teach my students there's 3 types of investors. There's people that are a member of the pie that are not getting paid for their contributions. They're part of the pie. There are people who invest small amounts of money that aren't enough to fully fund the company. They're personal funds. That's an angel investor. Or someone who invests other people's money in chunks that are large enough to fund your operation. That's called a venture capitalist. There's basically three kinds. If I borrow the money to invest in your company, where the money comes from isn't necessarily the problem. So pictures at the blackjack table. We each put $1 on the same hand of blackjack. My $1, I had to mortgage my house to get. Your $1, you just took out of your pocket. So it doesn't change the fact that because my risk tolerance is so much higher than yours, that our dollar amounts are different. We each still bet $1. Where it came from is irrelevant. Now, that being said, there might, if I'm taking a loan out and securing on behalf of the company, you might have an origination fee, for instance. You might say, I'll secure a $1 million loan for us, but I want a 5% origination fee for that loan in payable in slices, for instance. If I take a loan out for the company and I pay it off, then my payments are considered consumed cash. If I take a loan out for the company pays it off, then it's not really a risk position for me. So it's not the risk means, in this case, what's on the table, what's a bet, what's at risk, not necessarily what my risk of losing my job or my risk tolerance doesn't matter. Our bets are still the same.
I think we have a couple other questions coming in with 9 minutes left. One of the questions is, how do you maintain control of the business in relation to the shareholdings when the company grows and can count on a greater number of external investors that can enter through assemblies of non-majority partners?
So if you have a multitude of there's two basic structures that I see a lot. There's an LLC structure and there's a C Corp structure. In an LLC, there's a thing called a manager-managed LLC, where the members of the company can appoint a manager who has decision-making rights regardless of their underlying ownership. In fact, they don't even have to be owners at all. So, and in order to oust that person, it has to be the bylaw, the operating agreement might specify a supermajority. So there's ways of securing control there. In a C Corp, you would have a board of directors that would be empowered to make decisions on behalf of the investment community, the investors. So your power would come from the board of directors. So if you're the president of your company, you own 5% of your company, you might also have a board seat along with a couple of representatives. So board would be how you maintain control. If you're making decisions that aren't popular or don't forward the interests of the company, the board is going to put you out, as they should. If you own 51% of your company, which you can certainly do by making 51% of the bets, then you can force decisions that are at the expense of other investors. Of course, other investors may not invest in you unless you give them some mechanisms to exert some control. So there's a number of legal structures you can do. The best way to stay in control of your business is just to make good decisions or pay for everything.
So that leads me to another question. When you set up this agreement around the slices, are there legal documents that you're having the co-founders and the employees and others sign to agree to how many slices are put to what? Or is it more of a general agreement and is there a conversation later?
It can be either, but I have lawyers all over the world that do this, all over Europe and in Australia and some in the United States. And there's legal forms you can buy on my website for $50. There's an LLC agreement, an investing agreement, a founder's agreement. So you can document it anyway. At its core, it's a decision-making process. It's a way to make decisions that are fair. Mm-hmm. We make decisions all the time with equity splits, but most of them are unfair. We can guess about future events and just guess our equity split. We're 25-75. We can just guess, or we can implement slicing pie, which will tell us the right answer. One thing I've noticed over the years is there aren't multiple versions of fairness. Something's fair or it's not. If our dad gives us a cookie and says, split it up, boys, we break it in half, we each get half the cookie because we each paid equal amounts of nothing to get it, right? Mm-hmm. Now, you could give me your half, but your generosity doesn't make it more fair. It just means you gave me your half. I could steal your half. My greed doesn't make it more fair. What's fair is we each get half. Business is quantifiable. We can quantify things through fair market value and know what those quantities are, so the bets are on the table. There's no multiple versions. There's not a version that you think is fair that I think is fair. There's only one version of it. So slicing pie is a decision tool to make the fair choice. But it's just one of many ways you can make the choice. And whether you document it or not is up to you. Usually people are more comfortable documenting it so that it has more legal teeth.
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love this concept, and it makes so much sense for an early stage startup. With 5 minutes left in the session, there's been a lot of requests for you to provide details about your website. So maybe you could tell us again what the website is, and maybe one of the other moderators can type it into the chat room.
Sure, it's www.slicingpie.com, slicingpie.com, and my email is mike@slicingpie.com. And if you're on this session, you send me an email, I'll send you a copy of the Slicing Pie Handbook, which describes everything you need to know and has the retrofit tools and all that kind of stuff in there. I spend a lot of time during my day trying to teach people about this model. The people who have used it all of the years, I've literally never heard a single case where they said we tried it and it didn't work, unless they applied it incorrectly. As long as you put it in as described, it always works. I teach all my students this model. Students have a deficit in that they haven't been burned yet. So if you're an experienced entrepreneur, you've been burned once or twice, and you've felt this pain before. Students sometimes think, what could possibly go wrong? We're 50-50 partners, we're best friends. And that always seems to backfire. So one thing I do with students, I really take them through some of the scenarios that could backfire. But the number one thing I get is, I wish I'd learned about this 10 years ago before I started my last company.
Me too. Me too. Maybe we can spend the last few minutes. I'm not going to take any more questions, but maybe we can spend the last few minutes, because I have gotten a lot of questions about the value of the idea and the value of the business model. And you know, if there's 3 founders and one of the founders says, "Hey, I've got this great idea. I've got this great business model. I think we should run with it," and the other 2 say, "Yes, let's go do it," and you incorporate that into the slicing pie model, how does that equate? And I'm getting a lot of questions about the value of that.
So if you can sell something that has value, if you have an idea and you can sell it, then you can determine the value of it, the fair market value. If you can't sell it, it's either worthless or it's priceless. It's probably worthless. I have an idea here's an example, for a single polarity magnet that can provide endless energy for free. It's a great idea, it's a wonderful idea, but it's not worth anything because all I have is the idea. In order to turn it into something, I got to start a company with it. Just because I had that idea doesn't make it magical. If I spent 6 months working up a prototype, and I said to you, let's get together and start a company based on this idea, and then I figure out how it works, that 6 months of time is either worth my unpaid salary and expenses, or I've created that idea that's solidified enough that I could license it to the company. But what I can't do is just say I want X%, because X% is a meaningless number. It doesn't mean anything. It's just X% of 0. So I've got to figure out how to price this thing on the market. If I'm a book author, I've written books, it's logical for you to think that I could go to a publishing company and license my intellectual property to that company for royalty. I can either give it to a publisher and take a royalty, or I can give it to a startup and take a royalty in future value. So three people getting together, one has an idea. If the idea existed and is solidified, then it has a license value. If not, it's just worth the time and materials. People get often hung up on ideas. The problem with issuing equity at the outset of the venture for an idea is if you pivot and you paid for an idea that wasn't worth anything. With the royalty concept, if you pivot away from the idea, you don't pay for it, which is good.
Yep. Mike, thanks a lot. I've got a lot of stuff in the chat room saying super helpful tools and methodology. I have a feeling a lot of people are going to be sending you emails. And again, that's mike@slicingpie.com. www.slicingpie.com is your website. Great job today, Mike. Thanks for all of the attendees for attending this session. And I look forward to following up with you soon, Mike. It's been very nice to meet you.